This is Terry Wager. This is my vlog for February 27th, 2015. I have reported on previous vlogs that I am a victim of a murder conspiracy and a victim of a sting operation. And I have outlined in previous vlogs explanations, and I don't want to repeat those explanations each and every time I make a vlog. I'll try to give you a short explanation in case there are people that watch this video and are unaware of my previous vlogs. My wife was having an affair with somebody in law enforcement when she worked at the county jail kitchen. She worked at the Multnomah County Jail Kitchen as a prep cook. She was having an affair with somebody in law enforcement, and they made the decision they were going to frame me as a pedophile. And my wife was trying to hide her affair with this person in law enforcement, and my wife and her whole side of her family was trying to hide their connections with these people in law enforcement. And they all agreed to set me up as a pedophile. And they spent several months working on that, and the county sheriffs and the Portland Police Department joined into it and were actively directing and coaching my wife and her side of the family as to how to set me up. And they were using illegal video surveillance. They illegally bugged my apartment, and my wife, law enforcement had my wife turned against me, so my wife in turn recruited our daughters into it. And they were constantly performing for video surveillance. And they were doing so within our apartment. They were staging crimes, setting me up for crimes. They were filling my home with paraphernalia. And they arranged to get a double onto my property. And when they got this double onto my property, they were staging all kinds of emergencies to get me off my property. I don't know what they were doing with that double, that look-alike, when I wasn't on my property, but I know for a fact that they were using him as a photo double and just for staging video surveillance scenarios where they were setting me up as a pedo. My wife and her side of the family spent thousands of dollars at the direction of the county sheriffs to turn my yard into a playground. I lived at a duplex. I had a relatively decently large-sized yard. And they put multiple large swimming pools and a very large trampoline in my yard. And our yard already had a swing set because we had children. We have 3 daughters. We were by no measure of the word rich. We didn't live in a home. We didn't own a home. We were renting a duplex apartment. And we just barely scraped by. But when the county sheriffs made the decision they were going to set me up as a pedo, they were funding my wife and my wife's side of the family to buy all these different things for our yard, while the county sheriffs made the arrangements to get the double onto my property. That double was on my property for a month, and they were using this double to stage property theft, and they were even staging disasters, severe disasters, like 30 feet away from my apartment. They staged a full-blown car explosion, something you would see in a Hollywood fucking movie. They staged a full-blown car explosion 30 feet from my apartment, while they had a double on my property. And the county sheriffs, they took over the surrounding apartments, and they were trying to hide this fact from me. My wife and her side of the family were trying to hide it from me, and I basically uncovered their sting operation at its inception. Basically, the day the county sheriffs made that decision to frame me is the day my wife and everybody on her side of the family were celebrating that decision. They were openly celebrating that decision to frame me, and they weren't hiding this fact from me. I even asked them, "Gee, what are you guys celebrating?" And everybody on my wife's side of the family was having fun hinting at it. They didn't want to tell me what it was. They weren't. I swear to God, they were not hiding the fact at this point. They're my enemies. They're grinning and smirking the entire fucking time like Cheshire cats, and the whole time they're grinning and hinting at it, and they were implying that something big's going on, and that they were implying that it was going to fuck me over. So they were hinting at it and not really hiding the fact they're my enemies. They're so busy celebrating the county sheriff's decision to frame me that they didn't give a shit if my suspicions rose. They didn't give a shit if I suspected what's going on. And they were giving me so many hints that they might as well have just flat out admitted to everything. All of them were hinting. My wife and her sister, and my wife's sister's son, and my wife's mother. They were all hinting at it. And my wife's mother just literally blurted it out in my presence. And my wife's sister quickly, with a big-ass grin on her face, quickly changed the subject. So I basically uncovered everything at its inception. In disgust, I just walked away from these people and walked towards my apartment. And as I'm walking towards my apartment, I'm about 20 feet away from them. They all started talking about it, thinking I can't overhear. Now, I walked into my apartment, left my door wide open, and stood near the doorway there and just listened to them. And I basically uncovered almost everything. The only thing I didn't uncover was the fact that they're going to be bringing in a double. But I was already suspecting it because I had prior knowledge that the county sheriffs the Multnomah County sheriffs use doubles, and they use photogenic photos to frame people. I already knew they did that, so I was overhearing my wife and her family talk about how the county sheriffs were going to be taking over the surrounding apartments and everything, and that I'm going to be set up as a pedo and everything. This is what they were celebrating. Literally, this is what they were on my property, 20 feet away from the front of my fucking apartment. Not this apartment. This is not a duplex here. And they were openly talking about it, thinking I can't overhear. And I uncovered everything pretty much. I confirmed what I overheard them saying the next morning, because the next morning around, 9:30, 9:15, 9:30 that next morning, I got up, started a pot of coffee, and then I went outside to check the next door neighbor's door, and lo and behold, there's a 72-hour notice on the door, which wasn't there the night before. So that was my confirmation as to everything that I overheard was actually coming to pass. So I basically uncovered this sting operation at its inception, and was aware immediately I'm being targeted by a sting, and aware immediately that my wife and everybody on her side of the family are involved, and that they openly fucking discuss this with one another every time they're together. And I was already aware my wife was cheating. I never confronted her on it. I didn't want to confront her. I loved my wife. I loved my family. I loved my wife. I didn't want the marriage to suffer just because she's having an affair. Because I deemed my wife my best friend, I wanted to forgive her. I just chose not to confront her over it, and just to act like I didn't know. So I was already in a situation where I know more things than they think I know. And when I'm uncovering this sting up where they all agreed and made the decision where they're going to be setting me up for shit, needless to say, I was in shock. I was hurt emotionally. I was unsure what to do. I was debating on whether should I leave and try to warn people, or should I hang in there and act like I don't know what's going on and prove it under their fucking noses. I was debating, and I took almost a week to decide whether I should leave and try to warn people. And I weighed my options. I was weighing my options, and the whole time, keep in mind, I'm a father. I'm a decent person, and I'm a father, and I'm trying to think in terms of what would be best for our daughters in this situation. I'm trying to think of their well-being and throughout this whole process. And I don't think a normal person actually would have made the decision I made, but I actually did love my wife, and I cared about our daughters, and I didn't want to lose the marriage. I really actually did love my wife. I didn't want to think of her as an enemy. I didn't want revenge on her or anything like that. But I knew they made the decision was made to frame me, and that everybody on my wife's side of the family was on board with this, with these people in the county sheriffs. So I knew I weighed my options. I thought, well, I can leave, and I could try warning people about this, and I didn't think that would get any help. I knew I could warn some people. I didn't have very many relatives. I didn't have really anybody I could really actually turn to for help in this situation, and I didn't think that would actually get me any help. And I was worried that I would lose my daughters to this sting operation, because if I leave, my wife would just turn our daughters against me, and then I would never be able to, I would literally lose my family. And I thought, well, if I stay, I can hang in there and prove it right under their fucking noses that they're setting me up, because I already know how to prove it. Since they wanted me to know the day of its inception, that they all get together and they openly talk about all this shit. That's vital information. That's more than enough information to know how to prove it. I knew that's a catchable, predictable behavior. I already knew my wife and her side of the family well enough to know that, well, gee, if they're going to talk about it now on my property 20 feet away from me, well, gee, then they're going to discuss this shit anytime they're fucking together. So I knew I could easily prove that they were setting me up. Like I said, I had to weigh my options. I was in a great deal of denial and wanted to view the situation in a way that is not necessarily how the situation was. Like I said, I was holding on to the past. I was holding on to the marriage. I wanted to keep the marriage. I didn't want to be angry or upset with my wife. I didn't want to lose her as my wife, because I deemed her as my best friend. And there was a lot of conflicting emotions going on, and there was a lot of denial going on as far as how my emotions were in regards to it. But I made, I was debating on whether I should leave. I realized that if I leave, they're still going to frame me because they already made the decision to do just that. I knew I'm being targeted by a sting. That means if I leave, the sting will just follow me. So, and it would still just set me up because they already made the decision to do it. This is what my wife and her family was celebrating. I knew I could leave and warn people, but that would give away the one and only advantage that I had in the situation, is the fact that I already know, that I know what's going on. Because that is, after all, an advantage, because they all thought I didn't know. So I made the decision. In disgust, I made the decision to hang in there to prove it in self-defense. I figured, well, if I hang in there and I prove it, well then, when the time comes when they're actually going to press bullshit charges on me for whatever fabricated crime they're setting me up for, I've already had their goddamn sting already proved right under their fucking noses, and could prove my innocence because of it. And I really did, I knew I could easily prove it because I uncovered everything the day of its inception, and nobody was trying to really hide it from me. Any attempt to hide this sting operation, this setup from me, was half-assed at best. 3 days after the county sheriff put that 72-hour notice on our next door neighbor's apartment. The neighbors that lived in that apartment moved out, and 1 hour, just 1 hour after the old tenants drove off with their moving van, 1 hour later, the county sheriff's sting operatives in plain clothes pulled in with a generic moving van and immediately began loading up that apartment with police equipment and office equipment. No normal belongings that normal tenants would have. They weren't bringing in dishware or cookware or clothing and bedding or anything like that. They were carrying in police equipment, office equipment, computer desks, high-tech TV sets, printers, fax machines. This was the shit they were loading up in that apartment. Now, just keep in mind, this is only 1 hour after the old tenants moved out. And each and every time these sting operatives were loading their police equipment into the apartment, they were carrying out bags of garbage that the old tenants left and were placing those garbage bags into the yard. That's how blatant it was. The landlord that owned the place, the person that I had the rental agreement with, he never even got to inspect that apartment, let alone to clean it. Law enforcement, in a very fascist, blatant manner, took immediate possession of that apartment. And since they pulled in an hour after the old tenants left, I have to presume that the old tenants called the county sheriffs to let them know that they're out of the building. So this sting operation recruited our old neighbors into it. Now, this is how well I was keeping track of this bullshit sting operation of theirs. It was so blatant. It was so obvious. Nobody was hiding it. These sting operatives that were loading that shit into that apartment, they were giving me the slant eye treatment where when they're carrying shit and they're going back and forth from the apartment to the moving van, back and forth like that, carrying shit. Each and every time, they're facing in front of them, but their eyes are slanted in my direction. So they're very nervous about the fact that I'm standing out on a porch and watching them move in. I stood out there deliberately and had a couple of cigarettes and just watched them move in just to make them feel uncomfortable. Because I already know what they are. I already knew what they're there for. They're there to fuck me over. I already knew that. I wanted them to feel uncomfortable. I at no time was afraid, actually, of being framed because of the fact that I already knew how to prove it. I had so much vital information. Right now, I'm not telling you everything that I know about it because if there's one thing I know about my wife and her side of the family and their fuck sting buddies in law enforcement is they love their surprises. So I have to save some surprises for them. Pay them back in their own coins, so to speak. And I know damn well they love their surprises, so I have to save some surprises for them. But suffice it to say, I didn't fear being prosecuted or being framed. I knew exactly how to prove it, and with minimal effort on my part. And I already had the tools and equipment to know how to prove that they're setting me up. I knew exactly how to prove it with minimal effort on my part. The only thing I had to worry about was keeping their guard down by acting like I don't know what the fuck's going on. So that's what I did. I just acted like I didn't know. And that worked like a charm on keeping their guard down. Sting operatives are not very bright. Cops and county sheriff officers and their whore-ass girlfriends are not very bright. They're just very fascist and just don't give a shit if they're caught committing crimes. But they're not very intelligent people. Like I said, any attempt to hide any of this for me was half-assed at best. it was very personal on their part, and it was very personal on my part because they had my wife and her whole side of the family turned against me. And I found out after the county sheriff took over the department next door to me that they had our oldest daughter turned against me as well. Because right after they moved into the department next door to us, my wife decided she wanted all of us out of town for a day. And decided, oh, we're all going to go to the beach for a day. With money she didn't want to explain where it came from. And when we got back, I found out that, oh, geez, my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement broke into our home and did damage when they bugged it. So I knew they bugged the apartment with video and audio recording equipment. And apparently law enforcement really loves their top-down view. And I've discovered the reason why they had their illegal video cameras. They had that shit in the attic. And when they were in the attic, they cracked the fucking ceiling. There was a crack that went from one end of the wall all the way over to the other side. It was a long crack. It just went from one side of the wall. It went completely across the living room. That's how blatant it was. So fat-ass donut-sucking county pedo sheriffs cracked my ceiling when they illegally bugged my home. So I know damn well they love their top-down view. I find out a week later why. Because they were going to be bringing in a double. And I found out about somebody that they were making arrangements to get somebody on my property that is a look-alike of me. They wanted me to get the blame for shit that they were doing, and they were setting me up for crimes, and the county sheriff coaching and directing my wife and her side of the family and her daughters as to how to perform for their illegal video surveillance. My wife, ever since they bugged the apartment, my wife was telling our two youngest daughters to leave the apartment when she goes to work and to go over to a neighbor's apartment and to hang out there. And our daughters was doing this on a daily basis, every day that my wife left, she did this. But at the same time, my wife was telling our oldest daughter to stay home with me. So, and my wife's oldest daughter, she was being directed and controlled by the county sheriffs that were right next door. And they were directing her as to what to say and what to do for their illegal video surveillance. Now keep in mind, they broke into my home. They bugged my home. They had my wife and everybody on her side of the family involved in this thing. And they were directing my wife and they were directing my oldest daughter, to perform for their illegal video surveillance. Now, does that make me a bad guy? No, it does not. But they know how to make innocent people look like bad guys. And this is the reason why they made the arrangements to get a double on my property. And it was during the next 2 months after this point, after they bugged my home, not this home, but back then when I was initially being targeted by this thing. After they bugged our home, they were paying my wife and her sister to buy very expensive items to put in our yard. They bought 2 very large, expensive swimming pools, each consisting of around $350 each. And they bought a very large trampoline that cost easily around the same as those pools did. They were literally turning my yard into a playground. The whole time my wife's fuck buddies and the county sheriffs were right next door, directing everything. And they were funding everything that my wife and her sister did. They were even putting vehicles that did not belong to me and did not belong to my wife or her side of the family. They were putting vehicles, they were on my property, and they were making up lies as to the reason why they were doing this. They put a vehicle on my property, and they lied to me saying it was my wife's sister's vehicle, and they lied to me saying, "Oh, my sister wants to know if we could hold her vehicle for her for a while because she doesn't have the room for it." I knew damn well she was fucking lying because her sister owns a house, and she has a yard that's twice the size of mine. So I know damn well that they were telling all kinds of blatant lies like that, and they just didn't care. It was all for them. They didn't care if I knew. They didn't care if I suspected. They just didn't care. All they cared about was doing what the county sheriff told them to do and putting on these performances that the county sheriff told them to do. That's all they cared about. That's it. They didn't give a shit if I knew or suspected. They were constantly lying to me. They were constantly making shit up, and they didn't care if it was believable or not. All they cared about was doing what the county sheriff told them to do. And the county sheriff told them, put swimming pools in his yard, put trampolines in his yard, put these vehicles in his yard. And my wife and her side of the family were making up all these excuses as to where they're getting the money for the swimming pools and where they're getting the money for the trampoline and where are they getting all these cars and why do they need these cars parked in my yard. They were making up all kinds of bullshit excuses. The whole time I knew the county sheriffs, my wife's fuck buddies, were right next door. The whole time. I already knew. The whole time they're going through this process and stage of setting me up, I was documenting their communications right under their fucking noses. Every time my wife and her sister went shopping together, I would slap a fucking audio recorder with them, and they didn't know they had it. I knew every time my wife and any of her members of her family were together and they're not near me, they're talking about it. As a matter of fact, I knew every time my wife and her sister went shopping together, they're actually meeting with their fuck buddies in law enforcement that have the apartment next door to me, and that they were receiving further instructions as to what to do next. I was documenting these communications since I knew the day of its inception how this all started and how they're doing it. So I didn't fear prosecution at all. I didn't fear being set up. I was documenting the whole process of under their nose, keeping track of it, and documenting their communications and securing the evidence of it. I didn't have time to review the evidence I was accumulating on these people because, after all, I had to act like I don't know what the fuck's going on to keep their guard down. And I knew I'm under illegal video and audio surveillance by my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement. So I didn't really have the time to actually review their communications with their fuck buddies in the county sheriffs and the Portland Police Department. But I know damn well that I was catching them in the act. I had to concentrate on they're using covert means to frame me, and I'm using covert means to document the process and to document their communications. So it was very much a cloak and daggerish kind of a situation where I had everything pretty well figured out and just misjudged the size of it. I knew that they were setting me up. I knew that they had the blessings of law enforcement to do this. I knew that they were right next door. I knew they had the surrounding apartments surrounding mine, essentially. I knew they had our oldest daughter recruited into it, and I knew that the county sheriff officers that were right next door to me, they were the ones that were practically on a daily basis were directing our oldest daughter as to what to do for their video surveillance. They were constantly performing for video surveillance, and it was so blatant that it was just asininely ridiculous. I had, I was under the belief initially that it was just everybody on my wife's side of the family, and it was a few bad apples in law enforcement. Maybe like 2 to 3 people, maybe 4 at most in law enforcement that were involved in this. That was my initial impression of it. I didn't realize that they had the blessings of everybody in law enforcement to do this. I didn't realize they had the blessings and support of anybody and everybody that is a relative of people in law enforcement. It turned out to be something that was much, much, much larger than what I initially thought it was. Now, I had it well pegged in regards to how it was targeting me. But I misjudged the size of it because it was a huge fucking sting. And they were targeting multiple people at the same time. They were targeting my mother. They were targeting my father. My mother and father were surrounded by sting operatives at the time. They were using somebody as a double, and they were using this person around my mother during this time. And when they pressured my mother into allowing a person that is a look-alike of me into moving into her home, and he is a sting operative for the Multnomah County Sheriffs. After multiple people were pressuring my mother, my disabled mother, to allow this look-alike person that looks like me, he's not an exact twin, but he looks a hell of a lot like me, to move in with her. And she's disabled. She was on SSI. They strong-armed her and bullied her and pressured her. And they had multiple people doing this to allow this person to move in with her. And once she allowed this person to move in with her, this person was pressuring my mother into selling her home in Utah so that she can buy a motor home so that they can drive all the way to Oregon to visit me. And this person was telling my mother to not tell me about this. And he was telling my mother to not tell me that he wants to take her in a motorhome to Oregon so that they could visit me. He didn't want me to know any of that. He was telling my mother constantly, don't tell your son this, don't tell your son that. He wanted it to be a surprise. Well, after my wife and her side of the family turned my yard into a playground, I had an old person I used to be friends with when I was a child pay a visit to me. His name is Kurt Dunham. We used to be friends when I was a kid here in Portland, Oregon. And he is a sting operative for the Multnomah County Sheriffs. And I already knew that. And he didn't think I knew. He paid me a cameo visit. I already had knowledge that the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family, which is connected and related to the county sheriffs, they use doubles and photogenic photos to frame people as pedophiles. I already knew this. I knew this back in the 70s. When I was 6 years old, I witnessed the Dunhams and the county sheriffs using a fucking double and photogenic photos to frame a neighbor as a pedophile. I witnessed them do this fucking shit when I was only 6 years old. So I already had prior knowledge that the county sheriffs frame people as pedos using doubles. And I already knew the Dunhams were connected to the county sheriffs in this manner. Well, right after my wife and her side of the family turned our yard into a playground, this is when Kurt Dunham pays me a surprise cameo visit. And he was doing a lot of hinting. And he didn't think I knew. There's one thing I know about county sheriffs and their sting operatives. They fucking love to hint! Right after Kurt Dunham made this cameo visit, shortly after this, surprise, I get a visit from my mother and from a double who are in a motorhome. Surprise, my mother sold her home. Surprise, they bought a motorhome so they could drive up to Oregon to visit me. Surprise, we're flat broke. Can you let us stay here for a month until we get our SSI checks? Surprise. Now I have my disabled mother on my property who shows up by surprise, and I have this look-alike asshole on my property that's county sheriffs and the Dunhams and my own wife and her side of the family arranged to get onto my property. I'm aware at this point that there's way more people involved in this sting operation than what I fucking initially thought. I can't go on right now. I have to end this vlog.